Please, hide me in your coat, the maid's toddler whispered. What he discovered changed everything. Ethan Calloway had 47 things on his schedule before 9 o'clock in the morning, and not a single one of them involved feeling anything. That was the way he preferred it. At 34 years old, Ethan was the kind of man that magazines put on covers and journalists wrote breathless articles about. CEO of Callaway Innovations, a technology empire worth somewhere north of $6 billion, he had built himself from the bones of a childhood he refused to discuss in interviews. He had a penthouse in Manhattan with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the city, like eyes that never blinked. He had a private jet, 3 cars he barely drove, and a personal chef who prepared meals he often forgot to eat. He had achieved everything the world told him he was supposed to want, and he walked through all of it like a man moving through a museum, surrounded by beautiful things he was not allowed to touch. His housekeeper, a quiet and efficient woman named Mrs. Pearson, had worked for him for 6 years. She managed the penthouse staff, coordinated deliveries, and generally kept the machinery of his personal life running so smoothly that Ethan almost never had to think about it. She had learned early on that Mr. Calloway did not want conversation. He did not want warmth. He wanted things done correctly and silently, and she provided exactly that. What Ethan did not know, what he had never thought to ask about, because asking about people's lives required a level of interest he had long ago shut down, was that Mrs. Pearson had recently hired a new cleaning assistant, a young woman named Rosa Mendez, 26 years old, who had moved to New York from a small town in New Mexico 8 months ago with 2 suitcases, a fierce work ethic, and a 3-year-old son named Mateo. Rosa was not supposed to bring Mateo to work. She knew this. She understood the rules completely. But on a Tuesday in early November, her babysitter called at 6 in the morning with a fever, the backup babysitter didn't answer, and Rosa had already used her 2 emergency days for the month. She needed this job. She needed it the way people need oxygen, without apology, without alternative. So she packed Mateo's small backpack with his stuffed elephant, his juice box, his crayons, and a solemn promise from him that he would be very, very quiet. Mateo, for his part, had agreed with the gravity of a tiny diplomat. He was a beautiful child, dark-eyed and serious in the way that some small children are, as though they arrived in the world already carrying thoughts too large for their little bodies. He had his mother's thick black hair and a habit of studying things, really studying them, the way scientists study specimens, before he decided what he thought about them. He did not cry often. He did not throw tantrums. He moved through the world with a kind of careful wonder that made adults instinctively lower their voices around him, as though they were afraid to disturb something rare. Rosa settled him in the small staff room off the kitchen with his crayons and his elephant and the stern instruction not to wander. For 2 hours, everything was fine. Then Ethan came home early. He wasn't supposed to be there until evening. His afternoon meeting had been canceled, some merger complication that his assistant would sort out, and he had returned to the penthouse in the sharp, restless mood that cancellations always put him in. He moved through the front hallway pulling off his coat, his mind already cycling through the next problem, the next variable, the next thing that needed solving. He didn't hear the small footsteps behind him until it was almost too late. He turned just in time to avoid stepping on a child. A child. In his penthouse. Standing in his hallway with a stuffed elephant under one arm and a blue crayon in the other hand, looking up at him with enormous dark eyes that held absolutely no fear whatsoever. Ethan stared. The child stared back. "Hello," said the child. Ethan's brain, which processed complex financial data and geopolitical market trends with extraordinary speed, ground to a complete halt. "Who," he said, very slowly, "are you?" "Mateo," said Mateo. "Huh. How did you get in here?" Mateo considered this question with the seriousness it apparently deserved. "Mama," he said finally, as though this explained everything. Then he held up the crayon. "I'm drawing an elephant." Ethan looked at the crayon. He looked at the child. He looked around the hallway as though someone might materialize and explain what was happening. No one did. "Where is your mama?" he asked. "Cleaning," said Mateo. He tilted his head and looked at Ethan's coat, the long charcoal wool overcoat that Ethan had just pulled off and was holding in one hand. Mateo's eyes moved over it with that particular careful attention of his. He reached out and touched the hem with 2 fingers, very gently, as though testing whether it was real. "That's a big coat," Mateo said. "Yes," said Ethan. "It is." Mateo looked up at him again. Something shifted in those dark eyes, something that Ethan, who was not accustomed to reading children, could not immediately name. It was a kind of wanting but softer than that, a kind of hoping. "Could you hide me in it?" Mateo whispered. The question was so unexpected, so utterly outside the coordinates of any conversation Ethan had ever had in this apartment, that for a moment he simply didn't process it. "What?" Mateo's voice dropped even lower, as though he were sharing a secret of tremendous importance. "Please, hide me in your coat." He glanced toward the hallway, then back at Ethan. "We're playing hiding." "We," Ethan repeated. "Me and Ellie." Mateo held up the stuffed elephant by way of introduction. "But Ellie's not very good at finding. So I hide and she counts." Something happened in Ethan's chest. It was small, and he almost missed it, the way you almost miss the first crack in ice, the hairline fracture that comes before everything shifts. It was not a grand feeling. It was barely even a feeling at all. It was more like a door, somewhere deep inside him, moving on hinges that had not been used in a very long time. He looked at this small, serious, dark-eyed boy who had wandered into his controlled and immaculate life with a crayon and a stuffed elephant and a whispered request. He looked at his coat. He did not know why he did what he did next. He would think about it later, lying awake in the dark of his enormous bedroom, and he still wouldn't be able to explain it. He only knew that something in Mateo's whisper, the trust in it, the complete and uncomplicated trust of a child who had decided, in the space of 30 seconds, that this tall, serious stranger was someone safe, reached past every wall he had spent 34 years building. Ethan Calloway held out his coat. "Get in," he said. And Mateo, with a smile so bright it could have powered the whole city, climbed right in. Rosa Mendez found out what had happened through the worst possible sequence of events. She came out of the master bedroom hallway carrying a stack of folded linens, turned the corner into the main living area, and saw her son sitting on the floor of the most expensive penthouse in Manhattan, cross-legged and comfortable, with the CEO of Callaway Innovations sitting 3 feet away from him on the Persian rug, watching him color. The linens hit the floor. "Mr. Callaway, I am so sorry, Mateo. Come here right now." She was already moving, already reaching for him, her heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat. This was it. This was the moment she lost the job. She could already see the math of it. The lost income, the rent she couldn't make, the choices that got narrower and narrower when you were a single mother in a city this expensive. "He's fine," said Ethan. Rosa stopped. Ethan was not looking at her. He was looking at Mateo's drawing, a looping scribble of blue and orange that Mateo had announced was an elephant flying over a volcano. "He's been telling me about his elephant. Her name is Ellie, and she's afraid of loud noises, but not of the dark." Rosa stared at her boss. Her incredibly private, reportedly ice-cold, famously does not engage in small talk boss, who is apparently now fluent in the personal history of a stuffed animal. She started. "I should have been informed there was a child in the building," Ethan said, and Rosa braced herself. "Mrs. Pearson should have mentioned it." He finally looked up at her, and Rosa searched his face for the cold dismissal she was expecting. She didn't find it. His expression was something she couldn't quite read, complicated, careful, almost wary. "Why didn't you say something?" "I didn't want to lose my job," Rosa said, because she was too tired and too scared to be anything other than completely honest. Ethan was quiet for a moment. "You thought I'd fire you for having a child. You have a very strict policy about The policy is about liability, Ethan said.
He paused.
Is this a regular problem? The childcare? Rosa blinked. I'm sorry. You said you didn't want to lose your job. Which implies you've thought about this before. Which implies this situation, needing childcare and not having it, isn't unusual. His voice was not unkind. It was the voice of a man who is accustomed to identifying problems and wanting to understand their variables. How often does this happen? Rosa opened her mouth, closed it, tried again. Sometimes, she said carefully. My babysitter isn't always available and backup care is expensive and the daycare near my apartment has a wait list and she stopped herself. I'm managing it. You're managing it by bringing a 3-year-old to work and hoping I don't come home early. Yes. Ethan looked back at Mateo, who had added what appeared to be a rainbow to his volcano elephant scene and was now studying it with the critical eye of an artist considering revisions. How long have you worked here? For months. Mrs. Pearson says you're the best assistant she's had in years. Rosa had no idea what to do with that sentence. Thank you, she said finally. I'm not saying it to be nice, Ethan said. I'm saying it because it's a variable. You're good at your job. The childcare situation creates instability, and instability in household staff creates problems for my schedule. He stood up from the floor in one smooth motion, straightening his suit jacket. Rosa noticed, distantly, that there was a blue crayon mark on his sleeve that he either hadn't seen or didn't care about. We'll figure out a solution. Mr. Calloway, you don't have to. I know I don't have to, he said. I'm choosing to. He said it simply, with no fanfare, and Rosa had the disorienting feeling that she had missed an entire chapter of something. She looked at her son, who was now holding up his drawing toward Ethan with an expression of pure offering. You can have it, Mateo told him. It's the elephant flying. Ethan took the drawing. He held it at arm's length, studying it with an expression Rosa would have sworn, though she would have questioned her own sanity for thinking it, looked like genuine consideration. I'll put it in my office, he said. Mateo beamed. And Rosa Mendez, who had come to work that morning terrified she was going to lose everything, stood in the middle of her billionaire employer's living room and felt something shift in the air, something subtle and tectonic, the way the world feels right before something important decides to begin.
She didn't know it yet. Neither did Ethan.
But Mateo, who had always understood things that were too large for his small body, smiled his bright and certain smile and went back to his coloring. He had known from the moment the tall man held out his coat. Some people you just know. Over the following 2 weeks, Ethan found reasons to come home earlier than he had before. He told himself it was because he was working from home more efficiently. He told himself it was a scheduling decision, purely logistical, nothing to do with the fact that he had started looking forward to the part of the afternoon when he could hear Mateo in the kitchen talking to Ellie about whatever important things 3-year-olds discussed with their stuffed elephants. He learned things. Small things. That Mateo called spaghetti paschetti with tremendous confidence and would not be corrected. That he had a fear of the vacuum cleaner but not of thunderstorms, which he thought sounded like the sky practicing drums. That he had a habit of patting the arm of whoever was sitting beside him when he was telling a story, as though making sure they were still with him, still listening, still there. Nobody had ever done that to Ethan before. That small, unconscious pat. He didn't have a word for what it did to him. He only knew that he started scheduling his mornings differently, so he could be home by 3. It happened on a Wednesday evening in late November, 2 weeks and 3 days after Mateo had first whispered his request in the hallway. Rosa had stayed late because one of the other staff members had called in sick, and there was a dinner event being prepared in the penthouse. She had arranged for a neighbor to pick up Mateo from his after-school program, but the neighbor's car broke down. The backup plan fell through in a cascading series of small disasters, and at 6:45 in the evening, Rosa's phone rang with a call from Mateo's program director saying that Mateo was the last child remaining, and they were closing in 15 minutes. Rosa went pale. She was in the middle of a task she couldn't step away from. There was no one to cover for her, and the program was 23 blocks away. Ethan appeared in the kitchen doorway at 6:48, returning from a call. He took one look at Rosa's face. "What's wrong?" she told him. Quickly, professionally, already reaching for her phone to call a car service, already calculating whether she could get there in time. "I'll go," Ethan said. Rosa stopped calculating. "What?" "Give me the address." "Mr. Calloway, I can't ask you to." "You didn't ask me. I offered." He was already picking up his coat, the same charcoal coat from that first day. "Address, Rosa." She gave it to him. She stood in the kitchen while her billionaire employer walked out the door to collect her 3-year-old son, and she felt the strange and terrifying sensation of someone catching you when you didn't even know you'd been falling. Ethan arrived at the program center at 6:59. He walked in to find Mateo sitting in a small plastic chair by the front desk, his backpack on his lap, his elephant tucked under his arm. He was not crying. He was just waiting, with that heartbreaking patience of children who have learned that waiting is sometimes what's required. Then Mateo looked up and saw Ethan, and his whole face changed. Not just a smile. Something fuller than a smile. Recognition and relief and pure uncomplicated joy, all rushing into his small features at once, the way sunlight floods a room when someone finally opens the curtains. "Ethan," he cried. He had refused from the third day to call him anything else, despite Rosa's mortified corrections, and he launched himself out of the plastic chair with the complete physical confidence of a child who has absolutely no doubt that the arms in front of him will catch him. Ethan caught him. His hands remembered what to do before his mind processed what was happening. He caught this small, warm, solid weight, and Mateo's arms locked around his neck and his little face pressed against Ethan's collar, and Mateo said, in a voice muffled by wool, "I knowed you'd come. I knowed you'd come." Ethan stood in the fluorescent light of a children's program center holding a 3-year-old boy, and something inside him, something that had been sealed shut so long he'd forgotten it was there, broke open. Not painfully. That was the thing that surprised him later, when he was alone with the memory of it. He had always imagined, in the abstract, that anything breaking inside him would hurt. He had fortified himself against exactly that kind of pain for 20 years. But this wasn't pain. This was the feeling of a window being opened in a room that hadn't had fresh air in a very long time. This was pressure releasing. This was something tight and defended slowly, finally letting go. He held Mateo against his chest and stood there for a moment longer than was necessary, and the program director at the front desk very professionally pretended to be interested in something on her computer screen. "I knowed you'd come," Mateo said again, more quietly this time, settling his head comfortably against Ethan's shoulder the way children settle into places they have decided belong to them. "Yeah," Ethan said. His voice came out rougher than he intended. "Yeah, buddy. I came." On the drive back, Mateo sat beside him in the car and told him at length about a disagreement that had happened at snack time involving Cracker and a boy named Devin, rendering a full account with the narrative drama of a courtroom prosecutor. Ethan listened to every word. He asked follow-up questions. He said that Devin did sound like he had been unreasonable about the Cracker. Mateo nodded vigorously and said that was exactly right. By the time they got back to the penthouse, Rosa had finished the setup and was waiting by the elevator. She saw Mateo on Ethan's hip because somewhere between the car and the lobby Mateo had decided this was the optimal position and Ethan had simply adjusted, and her eyes went bright with the kind of tears that people blink back when they refuse to let themselves cry in front of their employer. "Thank you," she said, and the words were too small for what she meant. She knew it. He knew it. "Don't mention it," Ethan said, which was what he always said when feelings got too close. But later that night, alone in his penthouse after everyone had gone home, Ethan sat in his study with Mateo's crayon drawing pinned to the wall above his desk and thought about the weight of a small boy who had been certain, utterly, unshakably certain, that someone was coming for him. He thought about what it would mean to be that certain about another person. He thought about how long it had been since he had been certain about anything that wasn't a market trend. And Ethan Calloway, who had spent 34 years being very good at not feeling things, sat in the dark of his office and quietly, privately, felt everything. December arrived in New York like it always does, with cold that means business and lights that make the city look like something out of a dream. And with it came a change in the Calloway penthouse that Mrs. Pearson noticed, but was far too professional to remark upon. There was a small basket near the kitchen door. Inside it, a box of crayons, a coloring book, a set of small stackable blocks, and a soft fleece blanket printed with cartoon elephants. Ethan had ordered it from his phone at 11 o'clock at night, telling himself it was a practical measure. Easier for Rosa to manage Mateo in the household if there was a dedicated space for him. Pure logistics. Mrs. Pearson said nothing, but she had been working for Ethan Calloway for 6 years, and she recognized what this was. The Tuesday sessions became something else too, though neither Ethan nor Rosa had named them or announced them or done anything so vulnerable as to acknowledge that they existed. On Tuesday afternoons, after Rosa finished her shift, Ethan had taken to being available, somehow always in the kitchen or the living room rather than locked in his study, and Mateo had taken to treating the entire penthouse as though it were a kingdom he had personally been granted. He held court from the living room couch. He delivered verdicts on the relative quality of different juices. He explained to Ethan, with great patience, why elephants were better than lions, a position he was prepared to defend vigorously from several angles. He fell asleep sometimes on the long couch with his elephant tucked under one arm, and once, only once, he had patted Ethan's arm in the middle of a story about something that happened at his program, and Ethan had gone completely still like a man who'd been struck by something he didn't see coming. Rosa watched all of this from the careful, guarded distance of someone who had learned not to want things that seemed too good. She was practical. She had to be practical. She was a 26-year-old single mother with a budget and a plan and a life that worked because she kept its edges clean and its expectations low. She could not afford to look at the way Ethan sat on the floor with her son and feel the things she was trying extremely hard not to feel. But she was also human. And one evening in the second week of December, Ethan found her crying. She was in the utility room, and she had been trying to be quiet, and she would have succeeded if Ethan hadn't needed something from the supply shelf and walked in without knocking. She spun around immediately, pressing the back of her hand to her face, saying, I'm sorry, I'll be right out," in the clipped professional tone of someone determined to pretend the last 30 seconds didn't happen.
"Rosa," he said.
Just her name, nothing else, but something in the way he said it stopped her. She turned back. Her eyes were red. Her chin was doing the thing chins do when people are trying not to let them shake. "It's nothing," she said. "Please don't." "What happened?" She looked at him for a long moment, and he could see her weighing it, the calculation every person with walls does when someone asks them a real question. Whether to let them in. Whether it was worth it. "Mateo's father called today," she said finally. "He saw a photo, I don't know how, through someone mutual, and he called to tell me he wants to be involved." She paused. "He also told me I should have done better for Mateo. That this city is too hard, that I'm struggling, that a mother who has to bring her kid to work isn't doing her job." Her voice stayed steady.
"Just barely."
"He said some other things." "What kind of other things?" Her jaw tightened. "The kind that are designed to make you wonder if he's right." The silence that followed was the kind that has weight to it. "Is he right?" Ethan asked. Rosa looked at him sharply. "I'm asking seriously," he said. "Not about the other parts. About you. About whether you're struggling." "Every single parent struggles," she said. "That's not the same as failing." "No," Ethan agreed. "It's not." He said it so simply, with such complete absence of qualification, that Rosa felt the words land somewhere they hadn't expected to. She looked at him standing in the doorway of this utility room and thought, not for the first time, and with an amount of alarm that she felt was entirely justified, that Ethan Calloway was nothing like what he looked like from the outside. "He's the most incredible kid," Ethan said, and there was something unguarded in his voice that Rosa had never heard before. I don't say that. I've never said that to anyone. I don't typically. He stopped, collected himself. Mateo is extraordinary. And you made him. Whatever someone who hasn't been here wants to say about how you're doing it, you made a human being who trusts people completely, who sees the world like it's made of interesting things, who walks into a stranger's house and makes it feel. He stopped again. Feel like what? Rosa asked very softly. Ethan looked at her. Like a home, he said. The word hung between them in the warm air of that small room, and Rosa felt tears threaten again, but different ones this time. She blinked them back and looked at the ceiling and breathed. When she looked back at him, something had shifted between them, some membrane thinned, some distance quietly closed. He loves you, you know, she said. Mateo. He talks about you every night. What does he say? He says you're his best friend. She smiled, and it was a real smile, complicated and warm. He also says you make excellent juice selections for reference. Ethan laughed. It was a real laugh, surprised out of him, and Rosa thought it was probably one of the best sounds she had ever heard in her life. She filed it away carefully, in the place where she kept things she didn't let herself look at too directly. I never had this, Ethan said. He said it quietly, almost to himself, looking at the floor. When I was growing up, I didn't have this. Rosa waited. My parents were, absent isn't the right word. They were present. They were just never. He seemed to be searching for something. There was never anyone who made me feel like I was worth finding, worth coming for. He looked up. That first night, when he said he knew I'd come. I've been thinking about that ever since. Rosa understood then. She understood all of it, really. The basket by the kitchen door, the Tuesday afternoons, the crayon drawing pinned above his desk that she'd glimpsed once through the open office door. She understood what a little boy's whispered trust had done to a man who had never been trusted like that before. She reached out, carefully, and touched his arm. Just briefly. Just for a moment.
He's right, she said.
You always come. Christmas Eve arrived with snow, real snow, the kind that New York sometimes produces like a gift it's been saving up, and Ethan Calloway did something he hadn't done in 11 years. He didn't work. The decision had been forming for weeks, slowly, like weather. He had looked at his calendar that morning and seen the 12 items scheduled for Christmas Eve and felt, for the first time in memory, a clear and uncomplicated knowledge that none of them mattered. Not compared to what was happening in his kitchen, where Rosa was teaching Mateo how to make tamales from a recipe that had belonged to her grandmother, and the apartment smelled like masa and chili and something warm and fundamental that Ethan didn't have a word for, but recognized somewhere below language. He canceled everything. He walked into the kitchen in jeans and a sweater. His assistant had never seen him in jeans, would have questioned her own perception of reality, and Rosa turned from the counter with flour on her hands and surprise on her face. You're not working? She asked. No, he said. She studied him for a moment. What happened? Nothing happened, he said. He looked at Mateo, who had noticed him and was now reaching both arms up in the universal toddler demand to be held, flour-dusted hands and all. Ethan picked him up without thinking, and Mateo immediately pressed his palm to Ethan's cheek in an examining way, as though taking his temperature. I didn't want to miss this, Ethan said. Rosa turned back to the counter, so he wouldn't see her expression. But her shoulders did something soft and released. They made tamales for 3 hours. Mateo was an enthusiastic, if chaotic collaborator who got more masa on himself than in any of the tamales, who narrated every step of the process as though hosting a cooking show for an audience of one elephant, who fell asleep at the kitchen table at 4 p.m. with his cheek pressed to the floured surface and Ellie tucked under his arm. Ethan and Rosa stood side by side in the kitchen, quietly finishing the last of the tamales while Mateo slept, and outside the windows of the penthouse, New York sparkled and shimmered under its generous gift of snow. Can I ask you something? Rosa said, without looking up from the dough. Yes. What happens in January? She kept her voice practical. Professional. the voice she used when she needed to be sure she was standing on solid ground. His contract with the building ends, and she paused. You'll have your schedule back. And Mateo will miss you, and I'll have to explain it, she stopped. What if I don't want my schedule back? Ethan said. Rosa looked up. He was watching her with the careful, serious expression she had come to understand was what he looked like when he was being completely honest, when the performance of competence dropped and there was just the man underneath who was, she had discovered, far less certain about everything than he appeared. I've spent 34 years optimizing for the wrong things, he said. I'm very good at it. I can do it indefinitely. He set down the tamale he was holding. Or, I could try something else. Something else, Rosa repeated. This, he said simply, gesturing at the kitchen, at the sleeping child, at the snow outside, at the flower on his sweater.
This.
Whatever this is. You'd have to define that a little better, Rosa said, and her voice was light but her eyes were not. I know, he said. I'm working on it. He looked at her directly, the way he had learned to look at things that mattered, without flinching, without retreat. I know I'm not easy. I know I'm built like a fortress. I know you have a son and a life that has nothing to do with me, and you don't need complications.
Ethan, she said. He stopped.
You came for my son in the middle of a dinner event, she said. You ordered an elephant blanket at 11 at night and pretended it was logistics. You have a child's crayon drawing of a flying elephant pinned in your office next to your Harvard degree. She looked at him. You're the least complicated thing in my life right now. Do you understand that? He stared at her. You make us feel safe, she said. That's not a complication. That's the most important thing there is. In the kitchen, Mateo stirred. He opened his eyes, those serious, ancient, beautiful dark eyes, and looked between the two of them with the complete serenity of a child who sees the world exactly as it is and finds it entirely satisfactory. Ethan, he said, still half asleep, reaching out one small arm. Ethan moved to him immediately, the way he always did, the way he had apparently always been going to, and Mateo took his hand and closed his eyes again, and his small face settled into the peace of absolute certainty. This time, on this Christmas Eve, with snow falling softly over the city outside and the smell of tamales filling every room, Ethan let himself feel all of it. He didn't armor against it. He didn't file it away for later. He sat beside this small, extraordinary child who had wandered into his controlled and careful life and asked to be hidden in his coat, and he felt the staggering, terrifying, magnificent weight of loving people. Rosa sat down on the other side of Mateo. She leaned her head against Ethan's shoulder, just slightly, just barely, and he went very still in the way he always did when good things happened to him, as though he was afraid that moving would end it. It's okay, she said softly. It's real. And Ethan Callaway, who had built a $6 billion empire on the premise that he didn't need anything he couldn't earn alone, understood for the first time in his life what it meant to be rich. It wasn't the penthouse. It wasn't the empire. It wasn't the view over a shimmering, snow-covered city. It was a sleeping 3-year-old who had looked at a stranger in a hallway and whispered, "Please hide me in your coat," and trusted, with his whole heart, that the answer would be yes. It was the family you didn't know you were building until the day you looked around and found it had already built itself, quietly, in all the spaces where you'd finally stopped building walls. Outside, New York glittered under its snow. Inside, in the warm and flower-scented kitchen, 3 people who had each been missing something they couldn't name sat together and were, for the first time in a long time, completely and entirely found. Some families are born, some are chosen, and some, the rarest and most precious kind, find each other in the middle of an ordinary Tuesday when a small boy holds up a crayon drawing of a flying elephant and decides, with the infallible instinct of someone who has not yet learned to be afraid of loving, that this is the person worth trusting. Those are the families that last.